quite well. For Jonathan Toomey seldom smiled and never laughed. He went about mumbling, grumbling, muttering and sputtering, grumping and griping. He complained that the church bells rang too often, that the birds sang too shrilly, that the children played too loudly.
Mr. Toomey was a woodcarver. Some said he was the best woodcarver in the whole valley. He spent his days sitting at a workbench carving beautiful shapes from blocks of pine and hickory and chestnut wood. After supper, he sat in a straight-backed chair near the fireplace, smoking his pipe and staring into the flames.
Jonathan Toomey wasn't an old man, but if you saw him, you might think he was. The way he went about forward with his head down, you wouldn't notice his eyes, the clear blue of the August sky, and you wouldn't see the dimples on his cheeks, since his face was mostly hidden under a shaggy, untrimmed beard, speckled with sawdust and wood shavings, and depending on what he ate that day, with crumbs and bread or a bit of potatoes or dried gravy.
Well, land's sakes, it's getting colder and colder out here on the prairie. I think it's going to be a real cold winter, ladies. We got to have a harvest dance before everyone tucks in for the winter. I've got about all my preservings done, and I feel that I haven't been able to socialize in a month of Sundays.
Oh my, that would be delightful. Why, I was just talking to Frank the other day that I haven't, except for a Sunday meeting and a few trips to town since August for supplies, I haven't had a chance to visit with the neighbors, catch up on the news, since Martins did their barn raising back at the end of July. Seems like we have a lot of catching up to do. Did you know Mary Jane is expecting a new baby? I had no idea until I was at the store. George was there. He said she'd been mostly laid up for nearly to a month, but now she's finally better and back on her feet. If I had known, I would have had a meal over to her. And with those 3 little ones already, oh well, better late than never. Seems like a young family like that could always use a meal.
And did you know I have new neighbors here in town? You've probably seen them before at church. She calls herself the Widow McDowell. And I don't rightly know her Christian name yet. Nice enough, quiet. Comes with a little boy about what you'd expect from little boys. Not a bother to have around. His mama sees to that. It might do her some good, though, to go out and visit with some of the neighbors before the cold sets us all scrambling for home.
Well, I never. That Mr. Toomey thinks he's all too good for the likes of this town. Hardly ever gets out of the storm cloud over his head enough to see any of the rest of us.
Frank told me last week that he had a visit at the mill with Mr. Toomey. He said that about 20 words to him, and Mr. Toomey condensed his response to about 5.
Well, maybe he thinks words cost money, same as the wood he's purchasing. And we all know talk isn't as cheap as they say it is.
The village people didn't know it, but there was a reason for his gloom, a reason for his grumbling, a reason why he walked hunched over, as if carrying a great weight on his shoulders. Some years earlier, when Jonathan Toomey was young and full of life and full of love, his wife and baby had become very sick. And because those were the days before hospitals and medicines and skilled doctors, his wife and baby died, 3 days apart from each other.
So Jonathan Toomey had packed his belongings into a wagon and traveled till his tears stopped. He settled into a tiny house at the edge of the village to do his wood carving.
Yep, it's been a good year this year. Got a coon out of the chickens the other day and shot a coyote trying to help himself to some lambs. they sure got thick coats this year. It looks like we're going to be in for a cold one. The missus think that that we should have a family get-together before we all freeze into our houses.
Of course she does. Just about the time I get all my fall work done and I'm ready to hibernate for the winter, of course someone decides we need to have a get-together. Can't a feller ever stay home?
Oh, now, Frank, you know you like a good John, same as the rest of us. God made you to need to see a fellow man once in a while just to keep you from going crazy.
Well, sure, but isn't that what Sunday meetings are for? Last time I talked to you all, at least 15 minutes. Seems like that should be enough.
Careful, you'll be as shut out as old Toomey. Nah, we wouldn't let you get as shut out as old Toomey. But boy, I'd sure like to get Toomey to join into this community. It ain't good for a body to shut himself out like that.
One day in early December, there was a knock at Jonathan's door. Mumbling and grumbling, he went to answer it. There stood a woman and a young boy.
Hello, I'm the widow McDowell. I'm new in your village. This is my son Thomas.
I'm 7, and I know how to whistle.
Whistling is pish-posh.
I need something carved. When I was a little girl, my grandfather carved a very special set of figurines. When I moved here, I discovered that they were lost. I'd hoped that by some miracle I would find them again, but that hasn't happened.
Miracles are pish-posh. Now, can you describe the figures for me?
There were sheep,
2 of them with curly wool.
yes, 2, and a cow, an angel, Mary, Joseph, the baby Jesus, and the wise men.
3 of them.
Will you take the job?
I will.
I'm grateful. How soon can they be ready?
They will be ready when they're ready.
Oh, but I must have them by Christmas. They mean very much to me. I can't remember a Christmas without them.
Christmas is pish-posh.
Well, Thomas, that's that. We better get home. We have chores to do before evening.
The following week, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door.
Hello. Thomas has been asking to come and watch you carve. He says he wants to be a wood carver when he grows up and would like to watch you since you're the best in the valley.
I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here. Please, please.
No talking, no wiggling, no noise.
The widow McDowell handed Mr. Toomey a warm loaf of cornbread as a token of thanks. Then she took her knitting and sat down in a rocking chair in a far corner of the cottage.
No one sits in that chair.
Thomas sat very still. Once he needed to sneeze. He pressed a finger under his nose to hold it back. Once he desperately wanted to scratch his leg. He counted to 20 to keep the mind off the itch. After a very long time, Thomas cleared his throat.
Excuse me, Mr. Toomey. May I ask you a question? Is that my sheep you're carving? Excuse me, but you're carving my sheep wrong. My sheep were happy because they knew that they were with baby Jesus.
That's pish-posh. Sheep are sheep. They cannot look happy.
Oh, whoops. Mine did. because they knew that they were with baby Jesus.
After that, Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon.
Noisy church bells.
Thomas, it's time to go home. Thank you for letting me watch, Mr. Toomey.
That evening, after a supper of cornbread and boiled potatoes, the woodcarver sat down at his bench, picked up his knife, he picked up the sheep, he worked until his eyelids drooped shut.
After a few days later, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Griping and grumbling, he went to answer it. There stood the widow and her son.
May I watch again? I'll be quiet.
The teapot is warm.
While Mr. Toomey carved, the widow McDowell poured tea. She touched the woodcarver gently on the shoulder and placed a cup of tea and a bun next to him. He pretended not to notice, but soon both the plate and the cup were empty.
Thomas tried to eat the bun his mother had given him as quietly as he could, but it almost impossible to be 7 and eat a warm, sticky raisin bun without making various smacking, licking, and satisfying noises.
When Thomas had finished, he tried to sit quietly. Once he almost hiccuped, but then he took a deep breath and held it until his face turned red. And once, without thinking, he began to swing his legs, but a glare from the woodcarver stopped him and kept them so still they fell asleep. After a very long time,
Mr. Toomey, may I ask you a question? Is that my cow you're carving?
Yes.
Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving my cow wrong. That's a beautiful cow, most beautiful cow I have ever seen. But that's not how my cow looked. My cow was proud.
That's pish posh. Cows are cows. They cannot look proud.
Well, mine did because it knew that baby Jesus chose to be born in its barn, so it was proud.
Thomas was silent for the rest of the afternoon. The only sounds that could be heard were the scraping of the carving knife and the humming of the widow McDowell and the click, click of the knitting needles.
Hard on for all that noise.
Thomas, it's 6 o'clock.
Thank you for teaching. Thank you for letting me watch, Mr. Toomey.
That evening, after a supper of boiled potatoes and raisin buns, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up his carving knife. He picked up the cow. He worked until his eyelids drooped shut.
Timmy, do I eat? A mortal flesh keeps silence, and with fear and trembling stand. Ponder nothing earthly minded, for with blessings in His hand, Christ our God to earth descended, our full homage to demand.
A few days later, there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. He smoothed down his hair as he went to answer it. At the door were a widow and her son.
May I watch again?
As Mrs. McDowell warmed the tea and put a plate of fresh molasses cookies on the workbench, Thomas watched the woodcarver work on the figure of an angel. After a very long time,
Excuse me, Mr. Toomey. May I ask you a question? Is that my angel you're carving?
Yes.
Would you tell me?
Yes, and would you tell me exactly what I'm doing wrong?
My angel looks like one of God's most important angels of all.
And how does one make an angel look important?
You can do it. I know it. You're the best wood carver in the valley. Excuse me, Mr. Toomey. May I ask you a question?
Yes, and don't you ever stop talking?
My mother says I don't. She says I can learn the virtue of silence from you.
Well, speak up. What is it?
May you teach me how to carve?
I'm a very busy man.
Perhaps.
You will carve a bird.
A robin, I hope. I like robins.
with With a piece of charcoal, the woodcarver sketched a robin on a piece of brown paper. He handed Thomas a small block of pine and a knife. He showed him how to lop the corners from the block and slowly smooth the edges of the wood into curves. Thomas copied the woodcarver's strokes, head bent, tongue working from side to side of his lower lip as he concentrated.
When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Jonathan Toomey was holding Thomas's hand guiding the knife along the edge of a wing. He didn't hear them ring.
Thomas, it's time to go. Thank you for teaching me how to carve, Mr. Toomey.
Later, after a supper of boiled potatoes and molasses cookies, Jonathan Toomey went to his workbench. He thought for a long time. He sketched drawing after drawing. Finally, he picked up his carving knife. He picked up the angel. He carved until his eyelids drooped shut.
A few days later, there was a knock on the woodcarver's door. Mr. Toomey jumped to answer it. There stood the widow McDowell with a bonnet of pie, boughs and Holy Springs, dotted with berries, and there stood Thomas clutching his partially carved robin.
While Thomas and Mr. Toomey carved, Mrs. McDowell put the bouquet in a jar of water. She scrubbed Mr. Toomey's kitchen table and set the jar in the center on a pretty cloth embroidered with the lilies of the valley and daisies, which she found in the drawer below the cupboard.
Next, I will carve the three wise men and Joseph. Will you perhaps describe the figures for me?
The wise men were wearing their most wonderful robes of all because they knew that they were going to go visit baby Jesus. And Joseph was leaning over baby Jesus like he was protecting him. He looked very serious.
Thank you, Thomas.
All right, Thomas, time to go home.
What is that?
I found it in the drawer. I thought it would look pretty.
Never open that drawer!
It wasn't until
When the two had left, Jonathan put the cloth away. That evening, after a supper of boiled potatoes, the woodcarver worked on Joseph and the wise men until his eyelids drooped shut.
Yeah, I guess.
There's a song in the air, there's a star in the sky, there's a mother's deep prayer, and a baby's low cry, and the star rays its farewell, the beautiful sing, for the nature in Bethlehem. Cradles the King, with a song of great joy at the wonderful birth. For a virgin's sweet boy is the Lord of the earth, and the star rays its farewell, the beautiful sing, for the manger in Bethlehem cradles the King.
a few days later there was a knock on the woodcarver's door. He dusted the crumbs from his beard and brushed the sawdust off his shirt. At the door were the widow McDowell and Thomas.
I'm about to have the last two figures, Mary and the baby. Can you tell me about how your figures looked?
They were the most special of all. Baby Jesus was reaching up to was smiling and reaching up to his mother, and Mary was leaning over baby Jesus like she loved him very much.
Thank you, Thomas.
Tomorrow is Christmas. Is there any chance the figures will be ready?
They will be ready when they're ready.
I understand. Here,
I want no presents.
that's exactly why we're giving them. Come on, Thomas. Come on, Thomas.
The woodcarver did not eat supper. The woodcarver did not eat supper that day. Instead, he began to sketch the final figures, Mary and Jesus. He drew Mary, then wadded the sketch into a ball and tossed it on the floor. He drew the baby. He wadded the sketch into a ball and tossed it with the first. He sketched again. Once more, he crumpled the paper. Soon there was a small mountain of crumpled papers at his feet. He began to pick up the block of wood, and tried to carve. But the knife would not do what he wanted it to do. He hurled the chunk of wood into the fireplace and sat staring into the flames.
When he heard the church bells announce the midnight church service, he got up slowly. He opened the drawer beneath the cupboard, the drawer he had told the widow never to open. From it he took the cloth embroidered with lilies from the valley and daisies. He took out a raw woolen shawl and a lace handkerchief. He took a tiny white baby blanket and a little pair of blue socks. He placed each piece gently on the floor. From the bottom of the drawer, he lifted out a picture frame, beautiful, carved of sheep, brown chestnut wood.
In the frame was a charcoal sketch of a woman sitting in a rocking chair, holding a baby. The baby's arms were reaching up, touching the woman's face. The woman was looking down at the baby, smiling. Jonathan sat down in his rocking chair and held the picture against his chest. He rocked slowly, his eyes closed. 2 tears trailed into his beard. When he finally took the picture to his workbench and began to carve, his fingers worked quickly and surely. He carved all through the night.
The next day there was a knock on the widow McDowell's door.
Mr. Toomey, what a surprise! Come in. Merry Christmas.
From the box, Jonathan unpacked 2 curly sheep, happy sheep because they were with Jesus. He unpacked a proud cow and angel, a very important angel with mighty wings stretching from its shoulders right down to the hem of its gown. He picked up the 3 wise men wearing their most wondering robes, edged with fur and falling in rich folds.
He unpacked a series of carving Joseph. He unpacked Mary wearing a rough wool shawl, looking down on loving her precious baby son. Jesus was smiling and reaching up to touch his mother's face.
Mr. Toomey, these are perfect, absolutely perfect. Thank you, thank you. We were about to go to the Christmas Day service. Would you honor us by coming with us?
I think I shall. Better go see what those noisy church bells are ringing about.
That day, Jonathan went to the Christmas service with the widow McDowell and Thomas. And that day, in the churchyard, the village children saw Jonathan throw back his head, showing eyes as a clear blue as August sky, and laugh.
No one ever called Mr. Toomey Mr. Gloomy again.